इस मुद्दे पर सामाजिक असमानता और सामुदायिक स्वास्थ्य में जो रखा, वो एक अनुभव के आधार पर, जिसमें मेरे जन स्वास्थ्य सहयोग गनियारी एक नामक संस्था में ग्रामीण बिलासपुर में जो अनुभव है, उसके आधार पर मैंने अपना पक्ष इस मुद्दे पे रखा, जिसमें मैंने दो मुख्य बातों को उजागर करने की कोशिश करी। पहला कि जो डॉक्टरी इलाज है, जिसको हम व्यक्ति विशेष के इलाज के लिए उपयोग करते हैं, उसमें उसका सामुदायिक स्वास्थ्य से सीधा संबंध है और एक ही चीज के दो पहलू हैं। चाहे उसमें ये बात जरूर हो कि जो उसका जो स्तर है वो कुछ अलग है। हम समुदाय में हम बहुत सारे लोगों की बात करते हैं और व्यक्ति विशेष, जब डॉक्टरी इलाज में हम व्यक्ति विशेष की बात करते हैं, तो उसमें चाहे उसके जो भी मापदंड हैं, जो भी उसमें उसके दाम के बारे में, उसमें जो नीति उसमें उपयोग होनी चाहिए, जो उसके आधार होने चाहिए, वो एक ही जैसे होने चाहिए। इस बात को मैंने कहने के लिए मैंने ये भी बताया कि जो डॉक्टर एक व्यक्ति विशेष के इलाज करते हैं, वो भी सामुदायिक स्वास्थ्य पे काम करते हैं। मैं 2 मिनट में कर सकता हूँ। और दूसरा मैंने ये कहने की ये कोशिश की कि जो मैंने ये कहा था कि जो जितने भी हमारे विशेष नीतियां बनी हैं लोगों के स्वास्थ्य के मुद्दों में, उन सब मुद्दों में जो सबसे बड़ी परेशानी ये रही है कि इसमें हमने असमानता, इसमें हमने समता को एक मुख्य आधार नहीं माना, और इसके कारण ही सारी परेशानियां शुरू हुई हैं। इस बात को बताने के लिए मैंने टीबी, मलेरिया, लेप्रोसी, जननी सुरक्षा, माओं और बच्चों के, नवजात शिशुओं के स्वास्थ्य के जो सरकारी कार्यक्रम है वे, और जो ये हमारे लिए पब्लिक ट्रांसपोर्ट, जो लोगों के लिए यातायात के जो परिवहन जो हमारे निगम है, उनका तोड़ देना, लोगों के स्वास्थ्य से कैसे सीधा जुड़े हुए हैं, और कैसे हमने गलत मापदंड बनाए हैं इन सब प्रोग्रामों में, ये मानकर कि जिन लोगों ने प्रोग्राम बनाए उन लोगों को ये चीजें सहन नहीं करनी पड़ती, उनके असर उनके लिए वो नहीं, उनको झेलने नहीं पड़ते हैं, और जो लोग झेलते हैं उनके पास ये ताकत ही नहीं है कि उस नीतियों को वो पूछ पाए, उसकी परख कर पाए या उस पर असर डाल पाए। और ये समस्याएं, टीबी जैसे विशेष जो इतनी बड़ी परेशानी, मलेरिया जो सच में गरीबों की बीमारी है, लेप्रोसी जिस प्रोग्राम को तोड़ दिया गया, और उसके अतिरिक्त ये जननी सुरक्षा योजना और जो नवजात शिशु के कार्यक्रम हैं उस पर देखा गया। और अंत में मैंने ये भी बताने की कोशिश करी कि जो ये नया एक बीमारी है, जो ये गैर संक्रामक बीमारी है, जिसको हम नॉन कम्युनिकेबल डिजीज जैसे डायबिटीज, कैंसर और दिल की बीमारियों के बारे में कहते हैं, उसमें भी हमने एक गैर सामाजिक रूप से उसको देखा कि वो सिर्फ एक, जो कुछ हमने शहरी क्षेत्रों में उसके जो कारण देखे, उसके आधार पर हमने कहा कि सभी पूरे देश में हमको ऐसी नीति लगानी चाहिए जो कि मेहनतकश लोग जिनके पास खाने की कमी है, उनके लिए यदि वो करने को कहा जाए तो वो बेईमानी हो। And as someone interested in equity issues, even though I'm a physician, I thought this was one great opportunity to share many qualms that I have while working in the field of health. Well, my point of reference is that of a public health physician who is based in rural Bilaspur in Chhattisgarh. We work to provide health care to people from over 1,500 villages in the context of rural agroforestry economy. Majority of people are poor, and we try to, while providing healthcare, trying to understand issues through this window of healthcare that we try to provide, we are able to look at the society, analyze issues, and also try to find solutions. Trying to learn from this window of healthcare all that ails the society in terms of the inequality, the inhumanity, and the injustice that is associated with it. Not only this, we will also able to learn the actual meaning of public health, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and then I'll dwell on this aspect a little bit more. Yet in this haze of work, thoughts, and struggle, two things come very clearly to my mind. These are some pictures of some patients and the work that we do. Illnesses that can be as bad as a hand prolapse, people with low body weight, diabetes, something will be done to the color. Vesicovaginal fistula due to an obstructed labor. People in small places do not have small problems. The point that I would like to say is, when one is trying to see both healthcare, the health of the people, and the social inequity that we find, one question that anyone would ask is inequity becoming less in any way with the development that we are seeing? As a physician, I would say, observing there, that clearly we are finding that levels of morbidity, that is, illnesses, are increasing, at least for the set of people that we look at. The death rates, this is early data, but we have found that in the last year, death rates, at least in children, but also in others, are clearly increasing. Our infant mortality rates in our own area have increased by about 70% in 1 year. Nutrition levels have shown no improvement to the best of our information as of now, but this needs to be dwelt into more. And finally, we really have to, all of us have to really work hard to remain buoyant with hope that things can improve. But the point that I'm trying to, that would be the main message that I would like to discuss, is that social inequity, to my mind, has affected policies in public health. And for this, I'll be discussing two theses that I have. First, public health, and because this is not a group, this is only, that is, in a sense, dealing with public health. Public health is not fundamentally different from clinical medicine. It is not it is probably, as I would point out, that it is a continuum of care, of which what we call as public health is sort of artificially segregated from clinical medicine. By this, I'm also trying to invoke clinical medicine into this discussion about social inequity. And the second thesis is that the essential problem that I feel which plagues this is the lack of underpinning of equity in all our interventions. And I'll discuss this with several examples. Talking about individual and public health, when one is dealing with an individual or with the community, the yardsticks, the ethics, and the goals have to be similar. It is a continuum. In one, you take a history and examination and do some investigations. In another, you would do surveys and focus group discussions. In something, you would do some statistical inferences. In another one, you would probably do clinical decision making. The tools may be different, but the scale is clearly the only major difference. And here I would invoke a diagnosis of what is a public health doctor, because it starts. So for me, there are three types of public health doctors. There may be other types of non-public health doctors, I don't care. But those who may call themselves as public health doctors, type 1 doctor is that doctor who she is looking at a patient who comes to her, examines after taking a history, makes a diagnosis, takes a decision for what treatment to give, heals the body or the mind, counsels the person, and then also tries to influence rational decision making for students if they are working with her. And in as much as the entire community is a sum of the total individuals that we have, that person is doing a public health service. Type 2 public health doctor, I would say, is someone who's looking at proximate causes of ill health. Is this illness that the community is having due to lack of food, due to some environmental problem, due to some faulty public health practices, and then comes to a conclusion, looks at determinants of ill health, and then intervene by some preventive or promotive measures, and also some better public health, some better treatment policies that everyone should follow. This is usually what the type of work which most community medicine departments in the country would do. Type 3 doctor is one who looks more at the basic causes of ill health. At the political issues about ill health, talking about displacement, or talking about the amount of investment that is going into rural development, and then taking on from there and intervening in that sense. My worry is that there are very few of these type 3 public health doctors, and that was what concerned. And I would say that the spectrum there is a large continuum that has to be considered. And this is one of the problems, when you take things to scale in public health. Simple solutions are the best. Simple solutions are the best if they can be found out. But if the optimal solution is complex, so be it. You can't scale up by dumbing down. Whatever you want to do in terms of public health policy. I'll take an example of falciparum malaria. जिस प्रांत से मैं आता हूँ, वहाँ पर falciparum malaria एक बेहद बड़ी परेशानी है. falciparum malaria को कंट्रोल करने के लिए आपको जब कोई बीमार होता है तो उस समय सब कुछ जो कि एक एक्सपर्ट डॉक्टर को करने की जरूरत है, उसकी जरूरत है. इंटेंसिव केयर की जरूरत है, विशेष सुविधाओं की जरूरत है. लेकिन उसको कंट्रोल करने के लिए आपको सारे सामुदायिक स्वास्थ्य के जो प्रिंसिपल्स हैं उसकी आवश्यकता है. You require both. You cannot do with one of them. And this is an opposite to so-called intensive care to extensive care. And as I said, my second thesis was that the lack of underpinning of equity. The problem is that the buzzword in public health decision making is efficiency now, and this is trumped equity, basic thing. And this is also, you forget about effectiveness, humanity, or even the relevance of ill health. There is this thing about why I'm talking so much about clinical medicine is that by sort of by sometimes trivializing the role of clinical medicine in public health, we unburden the policy of the need for effective clinical interventions, which are as important as some policy. So what do? You make baseless assumptions. ये प्रॉब्लम छोटी है, ये प्रॉब्लम बहुत विशाल है, ये प्रॉब्लम बहुत कॉम्प्लेक्स है. मल्टी ड्रग रेजिस्टेंट ट्यूबरकुलोसिस, ये हमारे पास इतने सारे हैं, हमारे पास देश में पैसे नहीं है, तो इसे हम नहीं कर सकते. You use other measures like GOPSAT. Good old boys sit around a table and decide what are the best policies to do. And then you also have excuses of size, complexity, and expense. And then I would say finally, the one talisman that I would suggest for any public health policy that we would accept or criticize is, will you go through this? If you are sick with the problem that this policy is trying to look at, will you go through this? If the answer is yes, then the equity principle would be looked at. I would like to take this in the next 20 minutes with me, if I have, 5 such examples of policies. And if I am taking my time, then you can ask me to stop in any of these. First, I would take the example of public distribution system. With the hunger level of people, as this chart shows at least in rural Bilaspur, and I'm reasonably sure that would be true for most central Indian states, with body mass indices in men and women hovering around the early 18s, with heights of 151 and 160 centimeters in women and men, with a pecking order in the BMIs, from the first tribe, which are called primitive tribal groups, towards the others, there is an ascending level of nutrition. Food levels, and these are people who are going hungry every night. And when we have reduced food security as a concept, as a policy, to entitlements. Not about food for all of us, And that is what most of the debates seem to be focused on. There is an insane debate about how much food does a person require. The much fabled Chhattisgarh PDS gives 35 kilos of food grain for as recommended. I asked a bureaucrat, how did you come to the figure of 35 kilos? He says, well, 10 kilos for an adult person, so 2 adults and 3 children, 35 kilos, 5 kilos for an adult, for a child. Is that the way we would look at the requirement? FAO itself has said those people who are surviving on carbohydrate-based diet require a median of 18 kilos per month. And that is what we also showed from our data, that even the Chhattisgarh PDS lasts in all families over, for a median of 11 days. And for the rest of the 19 or 20 days in the month, you have to depend on the market. What price? There is another debate. What should it include? Should it include only cereals, dal, oilseeds, soap, and other things? And who decides? The erstwhile finance minister and now the honorable president of the country lost his sleep over it. This is on record about why people are, how would they give those 25 kilos that the food bill would have? But when people are going hungry every night, undernutrition means going hungry every night, and if that means someone is going hungry, the president can also do that. I would like to now speak specifically about this problem of tuberculosis. Tuberculosis, someone said, basically is the true captain of death. It is the largest, the program for this is the largest single disease control program that we have in this country. Let us see the program that looks at it. It is the revised National Tuberculosis Control Program that was launched in this country in 1997. It was launched because there were many problems were found for a program called the National Tuberculosis Program, which was actually murdered. The program was murdered over time. And this program came up supported by the WHO at that time, ideologically, on grounds of that the total burden of the disease is too much. You know, every year in this country, 20 lakh people get tuberculosis. This is also an underestimate because government's own tuberculosis research center says there are 85 lakh tuberculosis patients every year. The drug resistance is extremely common. We see a huge number of resistant patients, but the rest of the country probably at the moment is not looking at the problem of resistance in a very serious manner. Compliance rates were found. Compliance is a bad word. People who were able to continue treatment for the entire course was as bad as 33% in those days. And there was poor diagnostic ability. There was poor logistic support. So the National Tuberculosis, this new program that came said, oh, we'll look at 70% of, we'll try to diagnose 70% of all tuberculosis patients by our policy. We will also provide treatment for resistant tuberculosis. This is a decision as recent as 2007, and it is still very early stages. They said we will provide treatment by direct observation, which is called DOTS, but it was always partial, so it was called POTS, and now it's actually there is no observation at all. In Chhattisgarh, they are giving all the 6 months treatment at one go to the patient in the beginning. Microscopy centers were opened, and that has been one of the pluses of this National Tuberculosis, of the new program. And this was a highly centralized program. Even the Secretary Health in a state cannot make any decisions, cannot make any changes in the intervention, in the tuberculosis program. What has been decided is a central TB division. Just a quick look at the patients we saw in 2011 at Jan Swasthya Sahyog in Bilaspur. 587 new patients in 2011 compared to 470 in 2010. Median weight, that is 49% people have weights lower than these. 42 kilos in men and 34 kilos in women. That means at least 49% of all women with tuberculosis have weights less than 34 kilos. My 12-year-old daughter has a weight of over 40 kilos. 18 of these 587, only 5 HIV were there. We tested HIV in all. And diabetes was there in 18. So for us, most of it was related to undernutrition, hunger, as I would say. Already in September 2012, 15 of these people have died. And you know, we have already a large number of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis patients. The specter is so fearsome that we are worried what will we do in the future years. And I think this is only what we are seeing. I'm sure in other places the situation is not likely to be very different. There's clearly four policy problems with this tuberculosis program. At this moment in 2012, there is intermittent treatment being advised. That is treatment 3 times a week in tuberculosis. WHO, the daddy of this program, has already changed its policies in 2007 and 2010 to say that it should be daily in an area where resistance is more than 3%. And yet we continue with intermittent treatment. Drug resistance testing is still offered to only a handful of people. The standard of care in any head injury, if you have a head injury, the standard of care is a CT scan. And if in an area where you have some people who have resistant bacteria and some who don't have, should not drug resistance testing be a standard of care? And yet it is not offered to the majority of our people. And thus you don't know. DOTS provider. You know, this entire treatment compliance depends on the person, so-called DOTS provider. The treatment is handed over to that person. And the patient is at the mercy of this DOTS provider. Why could we not think of something like a family DOTS or some other method, and even try to find out why people don't comply with treatment? And I would say the greatest problem, policy level mistake, has been the lack of consideration to food. Because we do not associate tuberculosis with hunger, food got a backseat. Look at these weights. A family of 3 with tuberculosis, and all 3 not only having tuberculosis but hunger. Clearly, tuberculosis increases the risk of tuberculosis. Hunger increases the risk of tuberculosis, increases the chance of dying. Look at this. If your weight is over 40 kilos, you receive treatment, 3% death rate. And if your weight is less than 35 kilos, 14% death rate. Higher risk of drug toxicity. Whenever you see an undernourished person with tuberculosis, when you try to give treatment, you're worried whether the person will be able to tolerate. They don't even absorb the drugs very well. And clearly higher rates of relapse, which our national program does not look at all. You know, they don't even document relapses that happen. And this was a fantastic Madras trial that was shown when we were trying to find out whether sanatorial treatment was as good as home-based treatment. What was missed was that the food that the patients who were in the sanatorium that they received increased their weights by 11 kilos against a median of 2 kilos for those who receive treatment at the home. So if you only look at whether your bacteria have gone away, that is not fair. And therefore food was removed from the Madras from the entire TB program. Food was being given to the Madras state of the erstwhile Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh. And this has to be, and now we have to learn from someone in Haiti who tells that if you add food to drugs, your cure rates go from 56% to 100%. And in fact, this is the pida of tuberculosis, no? Who advises the government that what should we do? Why don't our leaders see any reason in this? And in that I would accuse that our academia, in this country, in the health academia, has really failed the people. They have not taken stands, or they have taken very limp stands, or have sunk into a position of isolation, and they would try treatment of their own, not questioning what anyone do. Why can't we have DOTS plus? That is multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. If you say that the treatment is expensive, so be it. You have to offer it, because otherwise you allow resistance to spread in the community. Why no supplemental food when there is clear data to show, and for which will improve the cure rate? And as I said, let's apply the talisman once again. Will you take the RNDCP tuberculosis regimes if you develop tuberculosis? I won't. And I will not advise it to any of my patients, whether they are poor or they are rich. I would go to another larger scandal in public health, is of leprosy. Leprosy is a disease of the nerves, and secondarily of the skin. If the nerves get damaged, you get a foot drop, or you get a wrist drop, or a claw hand. Sorry, not so the wrist drop. You get a claw hand. And if a person who's जो मेहनतकश लोगों का अगर हाथ इस पोजीशन हो गया तो कोई भी काम नहीं कर सकता. And that means almost employment death. Treatment, multi-drug resistant tuberculosis has been advised, and treatment is, there are other problems like reactions. The National Leprosy Eradication Program, the WHO and World Bank actually managed to achieve a virtual elimination of leprosy and a real elimination of the concerns. How? By changing the goalposts. Any AS would tell you in epidemiology that there are 3 points called control, elimination and eradication. Elimination means that there are no new cases of leprosy, of any disease happening. Elimination is that. So that means if you would study incidence of patients, no? But the WHO decided that they would now monitor prevalence. So the definition of elimination became that the prevalence should come down below a certain range, and everyone accepted it. So there was a normal definition that said the prevalence should fall below 1 in 10,000, and every means foul and fair was used. Reports were fudged, registers were changed, definition of treatment was altered, and in fact this was indicted by the CAG then also in the West Bengal, where they actually did all this. Treatment was reduced from 24 months to 12 months, cleaning of the registers were done, and every case had to be diagnosed, had to be confirmed by at a district level. Imagine in a district, if you have to get a diagnosis of, if you were in a village, you have to go to a district headquarters to get diagnosis for leprosy. And active case detection was discontinued. And therefore, leprosy was declared eliminated on December 31st, 2005. So, and the prevalence fell down by this time. And then this program was supposed to be, this is one of the successful vertical programs which was supposed to be handed over to the horizontal program, which was not ready to receive the thing, and all the leprosy patients almost actually fell down. And today, even in 2011, we have seen 180 new patients with leprosy at a small clinic at Garyani. And this was clearly done at the behest of the funding regime that was there, because it has been decided that there is another problem with leprosy, and that is the most serious problem, I would say. For leprosy के इलाज के लिए 3 दवाइयों की जरूरत होती है कम से कम, तो इसको मल्टी ड्रग ट्रीटमेंट बोलते हैं. But multi drug treatment is different if you are in US or if you are in India. In India, when you get multi drug treatment, you get once a month rifampicin, which is the most important medicine in the leprosy treatment. But if you are in US, you get daily rifampicin. And this decision is clearly in the documents of the USPHS or in the WHO documents, done because of cost effectiveness consideration. This word cost effectiveness given to us by economists has actually removed the equity concerns, and in a sense it has been a great it's a trivialization of the needs of people. So are we different animals that we should get different treatments for the same illness? Unfortunately, leprosy is not such a punctual customer. So I think we should accept it again and come back. I will go to the third problem which is closer home and more topical, of this maternal health and newborn care. So mothers give birth in institutions, the Janani Suraksha Yojana and now JSSK, and then the newborns are provided care at home. So home-based newborn care. Well, क्यों शुरू हुआ ये कि अस्पतालों में महिलाएं अपनी दस्तकी कराएं? Because obviously there was this thing कि जो घर में providers हैं, they have poor skills. Immediate health is available in a hospital, hopefully, and institutions can be more easily made more skillful. So therefore, why should we not encourage institutional birthing? And that was the WHO's stated objective very clearly. There were 2 other problems. People still don't come. अस्पताल नहीं आते, ऐसा सोचना था, तो incentivize them through conditional cash transfers. And fifth was obviously transportation is necessary. So you have cell phones, but you don't have roads. So therefore we have to somehow make people reach hospitals. So strategies that were used were train the health persons in obstetric care, train them, EMOM, CMOM, and then accredit facilities for birthing. conditional cash transfer, 1400 rupees for a delivery and 600 rupees for transport and the Asha. And offer transport, but only one way. aa sakte ho, go back in a bus. More deliveries in hospitals happen clearly, and in vehicles. So in Chhattisgarh, the ambulance transport is called Sanjeevani system. So there are a lot of Sanjeevanis have been born and a lot of Sanjeevs also because they were born in the vehicles. And they go back in their own buses or in their autos. And I don't know about other states, but there is an abysmal level of care for the mother. It is not a dignified birth for many, many people. Even now, there are no gauze pieces, there are no xylocaine, there are no drapes, there are no painkillers that may be given. And finally, this is other problem is that there is a clear ostracization of the thigh. The thigh has a role, and that has been clearly. And what is the ethics of conditional cash transfer? Look, in a situation where your institutional capacity has not been built up, where you cannot provide, where the basic levels of poverty have not been looked at, to provide cash to induce people to come to a hospital, I think is somewhere there is some major problem with it. I find it very degrading to offer someone to lure someone to come to the hospital because of this money. And there are studies now shown by many people that actually the money that you spend in a institution delivery has not come down. The institution deliveries have increased. Possibly other outcomes are better, but your expenses have not come down. And then coupled with this is the newborn care. Home-based newborn care has been shown by a good friend of ours that it can bring down newborn mortality for specific illnesses. And this has been, then when you look at the questions, and newborn period is very long, at least 28 days. So you require a carer at home. There's no doubt about it. But the premise was that people do not take their sick newborns to hospitals. Why? In our experience, the major reason why people don't take their newborns to hospitals is because hospitals are terribly expensive if newborn care is at all available. So one of the solutions is that if you had made newborn care free, in like obstetric care, then this would have been partly. And you require both hospital and home-based care. And I think if we apply the lens of equity, you can provide both good quality home and hospital-based newborn and obstetric care. It need not be an either-or thing like we have at the moment. Falciparum malaria is one of our largest problems. Falciparum malaria, as someone said busily, is the deaths due to that disease start where political power ends. Draw a map, falciparum malaria map in this country, and you will find, and you juxtapose it to the poorest areas in the country, to the Adivasi areas of this country, and you will see that they almost match. The Central Indian states have the largest bulk of this disease. And yet, as part of any respect for any illness, you have to get the correct data. There is such an insane debate about the number of people who die due to malaria. The government data is, how many 1,000 deaths in this country. And when they said that 8 lakh people have had malaria, which is also only an estimate got from the public institutions. And the million death study found a death estimate of almost 2,50,000. For you to die of malaria, even at a policy level, you have to die in a hospital. And you have to die with your smear positive. You have to be smear positive. Smear means blood smear should show the parasite. Otherwise, you are not supposed to be, you won't be labeled as a malaria-related death. And there is no movement forward on this basic inhumanity, I would say. Just to tell you a little word about falciparum malaria, even in the best of setups, 1 out of every 1,000 people will die due to falciparum malaria. Usually it is between 1 and 3%. So if you have 8 lakh malarias, at least you should have 8,000. Is that correct? Yeah, 8,000 deaths should be there even if that estimate was there. But but we know that the situation is even much worse. If you don't treat falciparum malaria well, 30% will become severe, and then in those at least 10% die. So a 0.1% mortality became 10%, 100 times if you don't pick up malaria early. So, as I said, malaria requires a primary healthcare approach, but when you have the disease, you require the highest level of tertiary care. So, new program came up and said, we'll offer artesunate, which is a new treatment, rapid kits, and long-lasting bed nets. Long-lasting bed is the medicine on the neck. And the ASHA would be the key person to deliver this care. No chloroquine for falciparum, and surveillance will be there. So, and we found that the number of deaths in 2010 were large numbers in our area, and we found that almost 75% of the patients who died due to malaria were Adivasis, and most of the people died at home or all while traveling. Almost 70% people died outside the hospital in 2010. Everyone knows this in central India, that most of the deaths happen in the months between October and December. And this is the month in 2010, in one block, we found that the number of deaths are maximum in early November. And look at this table from the country's disease surveillance program that looks at all malaria, that looks at all deaths and at epidemics. In that month, there was not even a mention of malaria in the country anywhere. So, hospitals, were not prepared, and are still not prepared with artesunate, which is the treatment that is now recommended for severe malaria. There is no blood. So, the three things that you require in a hospital for severe malaria are blood, dialysis, and intensive care. And these are all these three things which are furthest away from the poorest people. So, if you don't have correct spraying, which did not happen, there are no nets, there is no surveillance, there is no appropriate medical care for severe patients, and if people are undernourished, we are bound to have a man-made epidemic. And that's what we had in 2010 across central India. And in a situation where water harvesting structures are being increased, either due to the NREGA or otherwise. I would just take one more issue about a non-health aspect, non-healthcare aspect of health is public transport system. We have found from our data that 25% of your expenses that you incur on healthcare is for transport requirement, the indirect expenses. And yet, on grounds of cost effectiveness, three poor states of this country, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh, disbanded their entire public transport system in about 10 to 15 years ago. When they calculated the effectiveness, they did not count the health benefits that accrue from public transport systems. And thus, with scenarios like this, where the only, this is not for Three Idiots. This is actually a film in which this is actually the life where the only ambulance is a motorcycle ambulance in most rural India. Where we went for, we don't have any way to transport people who before they become, supine. And then you only go for things like 108, which offers ambulance services for emergencies. And you know how much the Government of India pays to the private providers? This is a private-public partnership where government pays 45 rupees per kilometer to these providers to ferry people to hospitals only for emergencies. Nothing for anything that is before the emergency situation. My biggest grouse is about public health systems, how they have developed. With the burdens of illnesses that we see, with rates that we have seen in a small area, these are early data. Actually, the question is, at this moment, except from some hospital-based data or some peri-urban medical college program areas, there is no data how poor people in this country live or die with. Even in 2012, we have extremely poor data for any illness to make right policies. What should we do about, how should we develop programs on basis of information that comes from rural India? And actually, this is a worry. How did we decide that there should be hospitals in cities and health centers in rural India? As if people in villages don't fall sick as much, or people in cities have too many illnesses due to some other reasons. So if you don't have data, then you will make such policies and these continue over years and years. And finally, we have rural healthcare has always been marginalized, and but there have been various new attempts at trivializing, additionally adding the trivialization of healthcare. We all in public health have argued for a village-based functionary, and therefore ASHA as a program was one of the the flagship programs of the NRHM was one of the most laudable ones. But if you make the ASHA, who's still a volunteer, you give her all the work, she's sought after by the MCH, the Maternal and Child Health, by malaria, by HIV, by leprosy, by non-communicable diseases. So an ASHA becomes a Durga who will have to do without any money being given to her. At a policy level, what are we trying to do when we are at the same time trying to privatize both secondary and tertiary care? My anger would not be vented enough if I do not talk about this new problem of non-communicable diseases. Non-communicable diseases compared to communicable diseases like tuberculosis, malaria, leprosy were first seen in urban areas, were associated with affluence or with sedentary lifestyle or with some other different food types. Illnesses like diabetes, heart diseases, cancers, mental health problems, and what have you. We looked at data from our own area and we found that in Cleary, as an example, hypertension is common, and is particularly 2/3 of hypertension that we see are among rural women. Diabetes, yes, we know that there is a thing called this is called nutrition transition in medical terms, where people have started having increased fat deposition around their mid-wrist, and the so-called obesity is happening, and that was supposed to be there because of more intake of food relation to your requirements, and also decreased activity. But this was associated with diabetes, and therefore, what we see in Chhattisgarh at least, the case in point, and we looked at Orissa also, 80% of the diabetics, and we see a lot of diabetics, are low body weight. Majority of them occur in hardworking and poor people, and very often they require insulin and they have high levels of complications. So, and cancer cervix. Cancers are the second group of illnesses that we see after tuberculosis as one group of illnesses, and the majority of them occur among women because breast and cervix are the major cancer. It is true that in peri-urban India or in urban India, the lifestyle that leads to these non-communicable diseases is that of probably an affluence or of sedentary lifestyle. That may be true, but there is a huge part of India where those people who have not even gone through this nutrition transition, who have not become overweight or normal weight also, continue to have those major illnesses which occur among, which are like, we see equal number of diabetes, hypertension, cancers and mental health problems among those who have not gone through this nutrition transition. And to this Trishul advice of eating less, exercising more and no tobacco is not fair to people who have not gone through this nutrition transition. And the another thing is that desocializing illness, to attribute it to those is not fair. So to end, I would say, to get to get equity back center stage, we have to have a universal program for all, for the rich or the poor, for the urban or for the rural, irrespective of their levels of payment. Planners have to plan as if they are planning for themselves. It cannot be that some people plan and the others suffer those planning. And those who suffer the planning do not have a say in what is being planned. Resources can be found. This bogey of resources is something that has to be really looked at. And inequity cannot be managed by latest tools from economists or technocrats. And finally, I would say, actually this is the question of making choices. Taking sides with the people, and that itself is an ethical decision. Thank you.